Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this session. As you probably have seen also in the announcement, there are two other sessions on the 27701 ISO standard. Today, as you also noticed in the announcement, I will be joined by one of my colleagues, Stefan Mathuvis. And I think we will offer you quite a unique view actually on the implementation and the auditing of the ISO 27701. Just a quick introduction on the agenda. So we will recap a few things, what we have seen on the previous sessions. Of course, we will not repeat the content of that one, but I would highly encourage you actually to have a look at it. Lots of the things we will initiate and talk about implementation will be referenced from the previous sessions. We will touch a bit on the implementations, and you see that I make a reference here to the 27001. The point here is rather talking about implementations versus what actually an auditor will look like and look at, and that's what Stefan then will explain later on in the session. Just to make a quick switch on that one is also how we compare ISMS, which is a 27001, versus the PIMS, or the Privacy Information Management System, which is the 27701. We will hint you to a few practical things because it's an add-on, it's an extension of the standard, and you need to take care of that one to implement it correctly. Just to quick start, actually the introduction then, or the practical part of that one of the presentation, we will talk about implementer view. Don't be surprised that a lot of things already have been discussed in the two previous sessions. But actually it's breaking the ground, cracking up actually for Stefan to explain how a auditor will look into that one, so in the rest of the session. So there we go. Good. Few things. First of all, you probably have seen my introduction. I will not take too much time on that one. It's the same as the two previous sessions, but I will explain, and Stefan will take the time actually also introduce himself. We have been working together for doing some audits on from Belgium, so we work together. We have been also discussing a few things, working on ISO, working on implementations of information security systems, but I will give the word halfway the session actually to Stefan to quickly introduce himself and then give him a bit more details on that one. Right. As I mentioned, this is a session number 3 actually on the ISO 27701 standard. We did a quick introduction actually end of last year. PCB has recorded the session. Also important that the slides are available also, and I will also at the end of the session show you we have recorded actually also the frequently asked questions. We have answered them in detail on a LinkedIn page. We will do exactly the same also for this session. We know it's very tight in schedule for the questions, so we will plan for some questions, but we were pretty sure that we will not be able to answer all the questions live today. Anyway, ask the questions, put them in the chat. Our colleagues on PCB are recording them, and we will make sure that all of these questions, of course anonymously, will be published on the website. So if there is any question, you can always revert back to us for more details on the answers, and I will try to document them on your questions. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate. We cannot guarantee that we will answer them in the session for today. Anyway, from the previous sessions, all the information available, and I would highly encourage to have a look at it. Lots of the details and how actually the ISOs are built are explained in 2 previous sessions. Right. Just to recap a bit on the ISO 27000. So remember that the ISO 27000 is an information security management system, meaning a management system is how you handle information security. It's a management system, not in the way of a software, but actually the processes, procedures, the agreements you have within the company actually to make it work in that sense. In global, very important to keep in mind that the ISO 27001, if you read it, you will see that there are 10 clauses. I will explain in a few details in the next slides what exactly these clauses are, but the most important thing, and that's where Stefan will elaborate for today, is there are 114 controls, plus of course the ones of the privacy system that will be added to it. Keep in mind that this is kind of the guidance for the checklist during audits. And also one of the things I still want to repeat here is actually keep in mind that the ISO 27000 is based on the PDCA system, so Plan, Do, Check, Act. And the reason for that one is that every implementation cycle, you start off your system, and every cycle actually you increase quality, you increase security of your system, and every step again, every cycle you run, your quality and your system gets better. We will refer later on also to the maturity of your system. The purpose actually of the standards is to make sure actually that you don't lose quality, you don't lose information security, you don't lose management in that sense, and that's what you see right here on this image. It's very nice also to see actually to explain later on also to your management. Quick reminder here, I don't know if you have seen the ISO 9000, but the PDCA system is not unique for the ISO 27000. So it's built in the ISO 9000, the current version is the 2015 version. The PDCA cycle is nicely explained, and the integration in the processes and the quality management, which is the ISO 9000. Is explained, and what's the purpose actually of this Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle you will see coming back. So it's not an ISO specific stuff, it's a principle that has been in practice already for ages, but don't think that actually the ISO 27000 invents this PDCA cycle just to implement it. It exists also in other standards and is a base principle in the ISO approach. To go a bit more into detail, it's quite important to also understand that the clauses, actually the 10 clauses that you see as first in the ISO standard are based here. So this comes from the ISO 27001 lead implementer course. I will not go too much in detail, but it's quite important to know where they are, how they relate to each other. And for example, that you will see actually the PDCA cycle is actually based on clause 6, 8, 9, and 10, and to continuously improve your system, right? Another point important for the introduction here of this system is that we're talking about ISO 27701 and ISO 27001. To avoid any confusion in that one, as of now, I will start talking about PIMS, Privacy Information Management System, and ISMS, Information Security Management System. Please be aware that the PIMS is based on the ISMS system, but it adds privacy, it adds data protection actually to make it work. So essentially, it's not just a shell, but it also uses the core system of our information security management system. It's quite important to know because some people think that the PIMS description in 27701 is very light, but it's not actually. It's an add-on into the ISMS system, right? So to avoid that one, I will try to keep to the ISMS and the PIMS, then you know actually to relate these numbers. In previous sessions, we had quite a lot of references to each other, and that's what I wanted to avoid for this session. Right. First topic I want to quickly introduce, and some of these slides you will see that that are referenced also in the previous sessions, is keep an eye actually on how you implement it. And the purpose of today is make sure that you understand that implementation is not purely technical. It's lots of processes you need to manage, and you always need to keep an eye on how to audit this, because finally, and most of the companies will start implementation because of certification. And keep in mind that certainly with the changes of legislation, the changes of new upcoming regulations, like for example the Cyber Act in Europe, certification will only become more and more important. Very important to know also about timing, and I will start first with the audit lifecycle because it's easiest to explain. It's an official system, it's recorded, it's fixed, and so on. So first of all, the official audit cycle starts actually with external audit. You could mention that also internal audit is very official, meaning that you must do an internal audit before you can do the external audit, but the timer for audit cycles actually starts with external audit. Simple reason is that the certification you get from that initial audit is repeated or must be renewed every 3 years. You're not sitting still for 3 years, but every year you need to do also a surveillance audit. So 1/3, minimum 1/3 of your implementation is validated every year, meaning after 3 years you have covered 100% of your system. But your system does not stand still. Actually, it changes. So that's what the auditor will look like, is how you adapt to the practice on that one. And that's where also the auditor will look into is do you improve your system, do you maintain your system? So there's a small part also the implementation part before the external audit exactly, and that's what also mentioned in the next slides. Be aware that also the auditor will look like the initial audit as the getting into control. So the first level of inspection is done at the first external audit, the external audit called also the initial audit. It's generally accepted that your system is not yet mature, but it will need to grow, and what we will see that you need to document. So here we were actually discussing the ISO lifecycle. Just a recap on that one. Keep in mind that for the audits itself, the counter officially is starting with the initial audit. Right. In ISO, actually the purpose is to renew your certification for 3 years. And meanwhile, you're maintaining your life cycle, and so you're not sitting still for 3 years. But the surveillance audit is the purpose actually to stay in control. And after a few years, you will see it actually start improving your system in that sense. And that's exactly also where Stefan will point out actually later on how to improve that one. There's a slight difference for the implementation cycle in that sense that that you must be aware that the implementation itself starts a bit earlier. Of course, you make the decision to start the implementation. It's nicely explained also in the lead implementer course at PCB. So you must count that in most situations, even for smaller companies, take more or less a year to implement the full cycle, because actually you will need to change processes, need to change procedures. And very important, your implementation does not stop with the external audit, because that's exactly like, for example, a train that you start, actually it starts running out after the years. And actually, so as Stefan mentioned, sometimes to customers, the external audit is actually the birth of your system, the official existence of your system in that sense. And you go over into maintenance mode, and you will need to keep up and running actually your system over years. You don't want to lose the investment of implementing your ISMS actually at that cycle. Right. Good. These things are discussed a bit more in detail in the previous session, so be aware actually that implementing an ISMS system is not just documentation. The purpose actually is to build in your security and the processing actually activities into your ISMS system. One important key point here on the implementation is make sure you have proof. Make sure you have evidence, and that actually the results, what you are achieving, actually can be tracked. That's exactly what Stefan will explain in the second part of the session on that one. Of course, and I will not go too much in detail here, but of course there's a pro and a con. There's a lot of people discussing ISMS as a compliance system. My practical approach on that one is that make sure you focus on results. It's not simply a checklist. It's not sufficient to just check the points. You must make sure that your system is as secure as possible. Of course, things change, and make sure you have evidence. Also, your auditor, very important. You must have a good click with him. You must him, her, or the company who's doing the audits, and an auditor should also advise you on how to approach, how to mature your system in many cases, right? So it's very important that you can ask some questions also to your auditor, right? One practical thing, that's also the second point of the presentation I pointed out in the introduction. If we are switching from an ISMS system to PIMS, so Privacy Information Management System, make sure you understand what the purpose of that one is. In an ISMS system, mostly the processes are about the internal processing of the company, of course, including vendors, but are the business process. That's a very important switch with the PIMS system, where we talk about personal data, PII as it is called in the official terms in the privacy information system. But that also makes that you're not in control anymore actually of the data itself, and main part of that one. ISMS is focusing on the business process, while the ISM PIMS system is actually covering the data of people, subjects, and you know, for example, from the GDPR legislation, that the GDPR and also other privacy legislations in the world give very high power and very strong means to these subjects, so they can request their data, they can demand for application of security, they can investigate you, they can put complaints also in the implementation of that one, they can go to the Privacy Commission or the GBA and the DPA in English, the data protection authorities, to file a complaint against you, and then you need to prove actually that you protect their data in that sense, and that's different from ISMS system. There are some regulations in the enterprise data, of course, but I try to visualize this kind of in this way, that actually the PIM system adds another layer actually on your ISMS system. You have more parties to count on. You need to report to multiple parties, and as you probably have seen also in the TPO course, you are forced actually also to properly report to subjects, to people in that sense. That's a major change actually in the mindset that you must be ready for to implement, right? Before we go into the audit and what we're looking, let us run actually through a few of these items, and I want to highlight a few things. Be aware that actually that you must know how an audit works, what you need to do, you need to provide information to an auditor that he can investigate your system correctly. As mentioned, it's not a results-based, not checklist, and it does not mean that you need to be perfect at the first level of your implementation, but always keep the general approach in mind, but make results. And so it's better to act on multiple small projects, bring results to the system, and then make sure that you can chain all these results in the bigger view on that one. It's sometimes very nice a few times a year to look back at your system, what you need to implement, and build on the results, right? The advantage of the auditor, as mentioned also in the previous sessions, and make sure that he can see at your system, he can look at your system actually from an external point of view. And in most of the cases, these auditors have lots of background information, lots of experience, and that one use it, ask questions, how they look at it, and use it for your improvement of your system in that sense. And one important thing here, key point we also discussed previously, is that you think about audit from the beginning. Don't think about audit at the end of the implementation project. It will help you a lot to make proof and make sure that you actually have everything in the system. Second important remark here is make sure you have an internal audit prepared, because the external auditor will look at your internal audit reports, and you must be able to prove that you reacted on the non-conformities of these internal reporting on that one. That's very important also for the external audit. One of the things I also mentioned in the previous slide is of previous sessions also is CMMI, Capability Maturity Index, or in system. It's a very quick system based on the 5 numbers, 1 to 5. 1 is mostly an ad hoc system. You react on a few things, but not proactively. 2 is one person or few persons know what to do. 3 is actually the base system for an ISMS, is that your procedures and are documented, multiple people know how to work with it. Number 4 is metrics that you measure. And number 5 is that you use these measurements actually to improve your system, and that's closing the gap actually and the cycle actually for ISMS. I will not go too much in detail, because all these sections that we will see is what actually how that the PIMS system matches the ISMS system. So you can revert back to the previous slide decks from previous sessions. It will explain in detail how it works, but the next steps we will cover will exactly touch all these activities. And you see actually the matching the 18 modules of the ISMS are discussed, and we will fit actually the PIMS system into this one on a few things, right? Let's quickly go into the implementation part of that one, so we can give Stefan enough time to look at the auditor part. One of the first things to start is the context of the organization, and this is mainly a management part, meaning the director and the directors of your organization should actually handle this, because building a company and establishing companies is all about this. But make sure one general point, it's documented. Make sure that you know what the company is doing. Make sure that you know the vision and the mission, but because that will be the driver actually for your ISMS implementation. Same thing here, module 5 or 5.3 in the PIMS system actually is making your leadership accountable for it. And accountability, as mentioned also in the interested parties part in the GDPR, is extremely important. Make sure that your management signs off for what you're doing. You get the support. And also very important during the audit, what they will ask you is, what did the management do? Can you prove it? Do you have some notes? Do you have agendas? Can you make some decisions? Can you prove emails on what they decided and how actually they took action to that one? Make them accountable. Make sure that they know what they're doing and they're responsible, accountable for what they are planning to do, right? Very important also on that one is the next module. To be honest, is ISMS module 6 is the planning part, and to be honest, one of the key points in this planning part, and which is referred to the PIMS 5.4, is risk management. Certainly the GDPR has added another layer onto that one with the DPIA, data protection impact assessment. In ISO standards, it's referred as a PIA, so the privacy impact assessment. So you can find also in the previous session some references, like for example, ISO 29100 standard and the ISO 29134, which is the privacy impact assessment description, how you should do it. So it helps you a lot. Key points here in risk management is make sure you have a risk register. If it's in an Excel sheet or do you have a management system, some software, it doesn't matter, but at least be able to show to your auditor that you know what the risks are. The main reason for risk management is that you can translate risks in funding, in value, in budget that you should do. One key important thing is, how do you get implementation of risk management in your existing environment, is make sure that first of all new processes follow the rules, do the DPIA and privacy impact assessments at least for new processes, and then start gradually adding your existing process. Very typically you do it a few times a year, or one of the important triggers is when you change existing processes, plug in the PIA to do so, right? As you have seen in the initial introduction, also one of the general modules that you must cover also is support, is ISMS 7, module 7, clause 7. Actually, it's very general, but it says make sure you have sufficient support actually for your implementation. This means you need budget, you need people with sufficient awareness, sufficient knowledge, and you need the time to do so. So this is not a really practical attention point. You must ask for budget, and you very likely need a business case actually to explain to your management to do so. So documentation is very important to get implemented on that one. The other clauses, as you have seen, is 8, 9, and 10, where 8 is operations. We will come back in the next part of that one, because in the Annex is all about operations. Performance and improvement is in module 9 and module 10. Performance means you need to measure it, so that's the CMI index 4. That is actually the target. And module 10, in this case, so 5.8 in the PIMS system, is continuous improvement. So that's exactly what I mentioned at the start of the presentation. Make sure that you keep moving, keep improving your system. That's why also that the repetition of your audit cycle will come back after a year, another year, and a third year, actually, to make sure that you improve your system. And an auditor will not look into the results only, but also make sure that you improve your system over time. So that's very important also to prove to your auditor that you can handle that one. Quick remark here, the practical implementation is referencing the ISO 27002, that's Annex A of the ISO 27001. Be aware that also in your PIMS system there are annexes also for data controllers and for data processors on that one, so pretty similar to what you see in the ISMS documentation you will see coming back in the PIMS system. Implementation security is built on the PPT principle, people, process, technology. So you can not only implement technology, you must make sure that people can handle it and they know how to handle it, and that's what the process part comes in. Right. The PIMS system refers into module 6, and we start off with policies. As we will keep it practical for the day, the previous 2 sessions handle the policies, so we'll not go too much into detail. In essence, make sure you have policies for everything you do and make sure you document it. And also very important, it's not sufficient to create these policies just once. You need to also make sure that these are updated. Very typically, make sure you do it once or twice a year, and that's where also the timing from the audit comes in, because once you are in an audit cycle, very typically a few weeks in advance of the external audits, you will make sure that your documentation is up to date so that the auditor, the external auditor, can look at it. Very important also for the organization, the PIMS system adds additional requirements to have responsible people for handling your privacy data, personal data, and very typically as referencing to the GDPR, you must have a DPO function or a privacy expert function in your company. As you remember that officially assigning a DPO is mandated by law for federal government and so on, but it's an add-on function. The only thing that might be different in this function is that the DPO or similar is actually the defender or is actually on purpose for the subject, while the other typical ISMS functions are defending the company. So they're serving the company, the enterprise in that one, and the DPO is slightly different that one because he's serving the subject. Very important, and also the GDPR, for example, has added some articles to support that function in that sense. So I highly suggest actually to have a look at it and to understand what the DPO is doing. Very important also is module 7 or the PIMS 6.4 is make sure that HR is with you and that you include the necessary function also on the contracting level. And one of the other functions that HR should be responsible for together with the security team is to make sure that the people are also aware that they actually make sure that actually you can communicate about it, you explain what you're doing, and training is very important, and you must work together with your HR team to cover that one. Right. Also very important, everyone in your company must be on board to protect personal data. You can have the slightest mistake, forgetting about USB sticks, leaking data. Everyone can be a source of leaking data. So make sure that everyone is in and be on the same train, be on the same principle of that one, right? Of course, generally, module 8, asset management, make sure that you have an inventory, you know where your data is, and this is a very cumbersome project in most of the projects, is make sure you have a listing, and that's where also a classification comes in. And just a quick hint here, I've tried to visualize this. It can be very simple to set up some labels, some categories, but keep in mind the ISMS system doesn't usually look at PII, so you must add also or fit in the classifications for PII. So the PIMS labels must be set. Just a quick hint here, there's a lot of guidance over the internet. You can easily find out how it works, but mostly the enterprise management systems don't look at protecting PII as an end-to sensitive data, so keep aware actually on that one. It should be pretty feasible to plug it in also in the existing classifications, but this is also what in the audit will be looked at. ISMS module 9 or PIMS 6.6 is access control, and most of the IT people know exactly what it is making sure that no one can get access, authorization, authentication, identification, or the terms that you will hear here. One of the things where the ISO 27701 is putting very big emphasis in is user registration, deregistration, or in short terms, identity management. One explicit advisory you will see in the PIMS system is do not reuse user IDs. Make sure they stay unique over time and make they are linked to persons or people very specifically. The reason is very simple, is that if you need to track access to data, illegal access to data, you must be able to make sure you can point to the right person. Right? Which we will not cover in this presentation in detail is crypto, although that you know very well that cryptography and making sure your system is protected is very important, but it will lead us too far actually to go into detail on the system to do so. One of the things that Stefan will cover in a few seconds is also physical security. Lots of our audits we notice actually people forget about physical security, but it's actually the basic protection of your system. Make sure that your buildings, your physical access protected. And literally during audits, and Stefan will explain later on, is what we do is visit the building, look from it from the outside, and look on a few physical things. And what I would like to advise here, implement layered security from the outside to the inside into your building. Right. Very important also, and let's come back in module 12 or in the PIM system 6.9 is operations. To conclude this, do what you say what you do, and prove it. Make sure you have evidence in real life. Make sure you can document it. And one of the things that can help you is, of course, event logging. And this is exactly where you will also get attacked in real life, is cybersecurity. Cybercrime will exactly try to attack that one. It's try to remove the logging, remove tracks. Make sure you have backup and make sure you protect your logs very well, because also internal administrators can be malicious, and the first thing they will try to do is cover their tracks themselves. So make sure that you protect your logs. Right. One of the other things, very general, available, and necessary to implement is communication. So make sure that you not only communicate internally, but also externally, and that also vendors, for example, are in the track of your communications on that one. They are responsible for protecting you, so make sure they know what you expect from them. Make sure they also keep your information confidential. Again, a very important source of leakage. That's exactly where the exclamation mark comes from. Right. Another part actually of protection you need to build in is in your software. Is do you build or do you buy a software? So this is what is called in the ISMS the acquisition of software. Do you build it? A development, a part of that one. What I want to point out here, even if you buy your software from third-party vendors, make sure they protect your data. Make sure that they can prove they built their software by design. Make sure that information security is in their software. And I don't want to put any names over here, but the last 2 weeks, and certainly with Corona, it has been shown very extremely important, even with remote webinar software. It's very important that they protect your privacy, so you can find a lot of reasons actually to be critical on this. They protect your data. You're responsible for that one. Right. The suppliers, exactly as I mentioned, well, make sure you cover them. One of the things I want to point out here is make sure you have the right to audit. It's not because it's a third-party vendor. It's not because it's an external vendor. You cannot audit them. Make sure you have the right. Go visit them. Ask for support. Ask for contracts. Make sure they audit themselves. Make sure they have certification themselves. And it's very easy to check if you have the right agreement with them to check out on that one. Right. One of the important things that is highly visible also in the PIM system is incident management, right? So make sure that the incidents are logged, make sure that you have a register for that. Just to be clear, an incident is not a data breach. A data breach means that data has been leaked or illegally accessed. An incident is a possible data breach, and make sure you log them, because this will help you out in case of a breach, in case that the data protection authority comes to visit you. Make sure you manage it, right? Very important on that one. Also for physical conduct, so ISO 27001 refers in module 17 is the business continuity management. Is make sure you cover that one. Is very important that you also cover in the incident management and in the business continuity. Make sure that you can rely on your third party. In many cases, you're not on your own. You need to rely on third parties, and that's exactly where you can work on that one. module 17 is make sure you actually exercise your business continuity. We have seen with the latest weeks, also with the implementation of Corona, that in case it goes wrong, that you can cover that one. And of course, very much important, make sure you're compliant, that you can still, even in the case of incidents, case of this business continuity, you can still prove that you're still compliant. So that is also one of the things that the GDPR and the legislation will ask for. That one, right? I will hand over the presentation to Stefan. Let me move him to presenter. There we go.
Thank you, Peter.
There we go.
Yes. I think it's this one. Do you see my screen?
Yes, clear, Stefan. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So, welcome everybody. I'll take over where Peter left off. So I will look at it from the auditor perspective, something which I've been doing for the last 10 years, on both in smaller organizations and in very large ones. Before we go into the details, I want to point out a couple of general things. The first one is that we encounter often, and it surprises me each time again, is that a lot of companies put in the implementation of their ISMS or their PIMS, they put a lot of effort on the controls coming from the Annex. And they very often forget the requirements. But this is very, very important to start with the requirements. So make sure that you also put effort in the chapters of the requirements before you look at the controls in the Annex. Secondly, as an auditor, we do audits on sampling basis. So we only have a short time in your organization. Depending on the size, we get a certain number of mandates to perform the audit. So we see things 1 year, and we might not see things and see them the next year. So it's always based on sampling, which means that it's important that the organization has self-discipline to also cover those things we might not have touched during the first audit cycle. That's a bit of general issue that I wanted to start off with before we go into the details. So if you look on the context part, what do we expect there? For us, it's important that in setting up your ISMS or your PIMS, you included all of the interested parties that can affect the organization's ability to achieve your objectives, the objectives that you set out yourself. We want to look, okay, did they look at all the interested parties involved? Here, if you look at the PIMS, take special care here that there is a difference, or there might be a difference in interested parties depending on your role as a controller or a processor. So always look from that point of view when you set up this context of the organization. Am I a controller or am I a processor? That might be that you have different results in regard to the interested parties. It's not in the context analysis, we don't only look at interested parties, but also at internal, external issues that can have an effect on your ISMS or your PIMS. This could be legal requirements like GDPR, for example. It could be fines that you can get from a regulatory authority or even from your customers when you have non-compliance. So as Peter already said, what evidences do we look for? Mission, vision. We need to know where your company is going to with this ISMS or PIMS. What does management expect from it? We want to see a clear scoping. What is part of it? How's your business model? What processes do you have? What type of data? And also, how do you communicate this to the outside world? Being business partners, being customers, being regulatory authorities. So make sure that we can see something very clear on that point so that it's clear to everybody what your ISMS is about, what your PIMS is about. Closely linked to that, of course, is leadership. Management cannot hide itself. It cannot be the CISO or the DPO that is responsible. No, we expect that top management has a clear understanding of the ISMS or the PIMS and that they take the full accountability of the system. They will always need to be interviewed during the initial audit and during the recertifications audit. So they have to be available for us as auditors so that we can get the feeling that they actually have leadership. We expect from them that they free the necessary resources so that the system can achieve its objectives. So management is much more involved into the ISMS or the PIMS than it was before. And for some managers, that's new. So they really need to know what it's about. So you have to, if you're responsible for setting up the system, make sure you involve the management deeply enough that they know what it's about. If we look at the planning part, risk management, Peter also mentioned it, it's not just showing us a nice Excel or a software in which you have determined your risks. During the audit, we will look at the methodology. How did you come to these risks? How did you handle the risk management? Which people were involved in the risk management? That's very important to us. And for me, the risk management is something that I have with me during the whole of the audit. I take it. I think it's for me. It's a bit the marker to which I touch different subjects. When we go through the system, when we go through the environment, through the building, when we do a tour of the premises, I will often go back to the risk register to see, okay, hey, did you think of this? Did you think of this? The risk register has to be a living document. It's something that we need to see changing. It's a lively thing, almost from day to day in some cases. So make sure that you don't do it once and then never look at it again. On the support part, and then Peter mentioned it, it's PPT, people, processes and tools. Technology, people are important. It's a management system. Management system, which means you have to manage your people. And the biggest risk is often the individual, the employee processing information, processing personal data. So there we are really looking for clear evidences that all relevant personnel has actually been trained on the ISMS, on the PIMS, but also on their role within the management system. So we will check awareness with employees. We will check, I will ask, sorry, do you know what a security incident is? What do you need to do in case of a data breach? These are questions that I will actually ask people that I have to interview during the audit. So it's not only the CISO or the management functions that need to know, but we expect everybody in the organization to understand that there is an ISMS, to understand that there is a PIMS, and what their role in this system is. Also here, special functions, like for example, a CISO or a DPO, there we also expect evidence on specific trainings. For example, an implementer training, a lead auditor training, an internal auditor training, so that we see specific competences for specific roles within the ISMS or the PIMS. Other clauses like operations performance improvement. Our role as an auditor is to see how well did you implement these management systems. Now we are only there a short time, so you have to show us how do you measure the performance of your system. So we're looking for KPIs, preferably smart KPIs, that show that your system is working. There are no standard KPIs. It depends a bit on the activity that you do as an organization and the importance of certain numbers to your management, to your customers maybe, or to your regulatory authority. So make sure there that you, when implementing the system, also think of ways to measure the effectiveness of the system. Compliance is one thing, effectiveness and efficiency is another thing. So we need some figures to tell us this thing is working. And that could be number of incidents, that can be threats that you detected, that you were able to control, trainings that you have done, a lot of possibilities. It really depends on the type of business that you do. But make sure you don't forget about these KPIs. Policies, Peter already explained this. I also do 9001 quality management system. There, the need for documented information has been diminished. In ISMS and PIMS, it's the opposite. We do expect to see a set of policies that form the foundation of your organizational measures. If you want to manage people, you have to make clear guidelines, policies, that they know what is expected of them. So you make a set of rules to which people need to obey. That's something we will look for. We will look at the contents. Is it in line with the strategic vision the management has with your ISMS or your PIMS? Another very important document for us is the statement of applicability. In the statement of applicability, you have to tell us as auditors and as certification bodies, which controls do we actually implement out of the 114 for 27001, which are relevant for my PIMS. So you have to motivate why you use one or why you don't use one. So even if you exclude a control, make sure that you also tell us why you exclude it, but also why you include it. Bear in mind here also that out of the 114 controls, you cannot really exclude 80, for example. It's more a few that you can exclude because it might not be relevant. If you don't have design and development, okay, then you can exclude those controls. However, for a lot of other controls, even you would outsource it to a third party, you still are accountable for them. So don't forget, it's not only, you don't only have to, if you don't do it, it doesn't mean it can be excluded. Watch out, if you stay accountable, it should be included in the statement of applicability. So take your time when setting up the statement of applicability. It's an important document for us as auditors to see, let's say, the depth of your ISMS or PIMS. Your organization, roles and responsibilities. Peter already pointed it out. It needs to be clear for us who's a process responsible. It needs to be clear for us what responsibilities are given to people in the ISMS or in the PIMS, so that we can talk to the right people, that we know where to look for what, and that we can also see how this RACI is set up, so that we can see the flow, especially with, if you have PII, personal data, it's important there that this is looked at very carefully, so that only the need to know principle is actually implemented. Of course, we look for function descriptions, onboarding, offboarding process, very important as well. So make sure there that you can clearly show us this. Hiring. It's easy to audit for us. How do we do it? We just ask who's the last employee or a couple of employees that came in last, and we will go through the process. So that means it starts, how did you find this employee? What kind of screening did you use? Was it in line with the legal requirements, the regulatory requirements of your country? So we try to look for this onboarding process. How is it handled? Did you do technical tests? Did you look at his LinkedIn profile? Did you check if his degrees was actually real? So there are lots of ways to do this. Depending on the country we are in, there are more or less possibilities. But then once he has to start, we will also look, okay, this new person is coming in. How is this communicated with the IT department? What role and related access rights will the new hire get? How is this communicated to the IT department? That's for us very important, because there you start giving people access to your data or to personal data that you process or control. So we need to clearly see how that went. We also want to see how was the initial training of this new hire. And we need to see clear evidences of this. So we expect a training plan. We need to see that the training plan was executed, and we want to see somebody saying, okay, this training plan was concluded successfully. The employee is ready to go into his normal job. Once the employee is there, we also look on competence building. We look at disciplinary processes in case there's a breach of policies. How do you handle those kind of things? So also there, we will look for how this is done. And lastly, people sometimes leave voluntarily or with a little bit of help. So there also we see, were the access rights revoked? Was the profile put on inactive? Can they still access certain applications or maybe web-based platforms from outside? If you have a person in the marketing department, for example, and they were handling your LinkedIn profile of the company or your Facebook profile, and they leave, okay, they could still access that from home. How did you handle this? How are you sure that this is not possible anymore? So that's the kind of evidence we really look for during an audit. People don't always just offboard. It's also possible that they change positions within an organization. That's also access control. So watch out if they go from, let's say, maybe personnel department, and now they're going to do some work for the internal sales department. They should not have the same access rights. So we don't only look at people offboarding, but also we will look at people changing jobs. This is covered in the controls where we expect also to see regular reviews of your access rights. Here you have to pay attention. It's not only the access rights that were given by IT on entering the network systems or certain applications, but this also means that you have to look at access rights that people got from online platforms or maybe applications that are used for salary calculations or administrative handling. So there, take a broad perspective. Look at all the applications that you have, all the different levels of access in all these different applications. So there also, during the audit, we see people showing us applications. And for each of these applications, we will want to see regular reviews of the access rights to those applications. If you have single sign-on, it's easier. If not, you have to think of other things so that you can manage this in a good way. Crypto, it's special. It's often said as not applicable, but watch out. You quickly have crypto. If you have HTTPS on your website, you have crypto. If you have BitLocker on your laptops, you have crypto. So also here, we mainly see how this is handled. Who's managing it? Key management is important. Understanding the different crypto implementations, it needs to be documented. Crypto in development is different than crypto in IT. It's maybe different than crypto in managing your website. If you handle personal data, then crypto might become even more important because it could be a regulatory requirement that there is two-factor authentication or something else. So also here, depending on what you do, the level of crypto could be different, and that's what we're going to look for. How is crypto managed? Is it there where it has to be? And if it's there, how is it then managed to make sure that you don't lose data? As Peter mentioned, physical security, this is the fun part for us as auditors, because we will go through your premises. And our eyes, we have eyes everywhere. We use this to look around. We have good ears, we hear things, we see things. So a site tour, when you implement your system, do it a couple of times. Because it's not only how I access the building, but it's also once I'm in, which offices can I enter? What do I see on the desks? Is there a clear screen, clean desk policy implemented? What do I find? Is there still documents printed out on the printer? So these are the things that we will look for when we go through your organization. Things that often are forgotten is meeting rooms. When you're in a meeting room and there's a flip chart, okay, maybe I still see 10 meetings ago, management was in that meeting room, and I see the list of people they're gonna lay off in the next 10 days. So when you have a meeting, take away the flip charts if you don't want other people in your company to see them again. So those are things that you have to think about when we talk about physical security. It's a very broad perspective. Go around in your organization. Maybe you have to go to the basement, maybe you have to go to the attic. Make sure that you have covered all of these elements to make sure that there cannot be any unwanted visitors in your organization. The operations part, that's everything you actually do. How's your ISMS, how's your PIMS implemented in the day-to-day business? That there we look a bit on what activity that you do. If you're a hospital, we might be a bit more strict than when you are, let's say, a car dealer. So it depends on your activity. Let's say the amount of documentation we expect to see depends also on your risks that you determined, on the confidentiality level of your information that you have to handle. But here you have to make sure when you set up the system that you create sufficient documentation so that the operational processes can run, that they have continuity, and that it's clear for everybody in the organization what is expected of them. So that brings us to information and communication. How do we communicate information to third parties? How do you do that to vendors? We look here also at NDAs, confidentiality agreements within contracts. So here we will look at these kinds of documents, contracts, NDAs that were signed, and make sure that there are clear agreements between the organization and customers or other third parties with which you have to exchange data. Again, here, if it's personal data, it needs to be even more strict. You need to have processing agreements. We need to see evidence that not only the processing agreements are there, but also that they are implemented within the organization. A common mistake, what we often see is, oh yeah, do you have NDAs? Yes, of course we have NDAs. They're nicely signed when we won the contract with the customer, but they were signed maybe by legal, maybe by sales, but the project engineers who have to do the project have no clue whatsoever what's in the NDA. That is what we as auditors will look for. We will look, if we saw an NDA with legal guys on a project, when we audit the project, we will see if the requirements of the NDA are lived by the people who actually perform the product. So watch out there that you have this waterfall principle, that NDA requirements are translated into your organization. Build or buy, if you develop new software or you buy software, privacy by design, privacy by default, very important. We want evidence that these principles are known by the development team and implemented in the development lifecycle of the application. Same goes when you're buying an application. You're going to use an existing platform. We also need to see the principles are being part of the selection and purchasing process. So we need to see evidence when you decided, hey, let's use Jira, for example. We need to see some decision-making process in which you checked if all of your security requirements are met by the supplier that you select or the application that you would select. So make sure they're also not only your own development, but also what you buy in from third parties. You need to manage the evidences that you looked at it from a security perspective, from a personal data perspective, that you covered all of the requirements on that side as well. Supplier audits, Peter also mentioned it. It might be necessary that you do supplier audits. It depends on the type of supplier that you have. If you're the controller and you work with processes, you should be able to go there and audit them. You can also audit them, let's say, in a back office environment where you would look at their certifications, at their maybe incident report handling process, etc. But make sure that you have a clear management of your vendors, of your suppliers, so that all the efforts that you do to maintain the security of your data, that they also do it when you transfer data to them. Also important here is vendors that really enter into your applications. Like if you have an ERP and your ERP partner has access to your database, or maybe even worse, they have copies of your database on site to do tests. Make sure this is covered in contracts, that you check how they handle it, that you make sure there that you don't lose data with one of your partners. Incident management, Peter already said, for us it's a good way to see if your system is working. If we come back, when we come the first year for the initial audit, we don't expect to see hundreds of incidents logged. If we come back the second year and there's still no incident logged, then we start asking questions. How mature is the system? Do the people understand what a security incident is? So make sure when you set up your system that you train people, all of the people in your organization, to detect a security incident and to be able to know where to log one or where to report one. So how disciplined are the employees to report security incidents, and how good is your organization in analyzing them and learning from them? We do not believe in having none. So that's important. Think about it. That you get enough input as a DPO or as a CISO, that you get feedback from your people when they see things, that it comes back. Business continuity. What if things go wrong? With COVID-19, it's an interesting case. A lot of companies were suddenly forced to go into remote working mode. How when having an ISMS or a PIMS, we expect you to think of this in advance. So we touch it to some degree. There's a separate standard for that, but we do touch it. We do want to see that the CIA of data is covered also in adverse situations. So when it goes wrong, you have to show us something. How would you handle it? Make sure there that a disaster recovery plan can be shown to us, that you have thought about it or you've entered it into your risk assessment, so that we see some evidence of that as well. Compliance. You need to create a compliance matrix for us. We need to see what applicable legislation is there for you as an organization, but not only legislation, also contractual requirements. So if you have SLAs, if you have specific requirements from your customers, also make sure to enter them into a document, the compliance matrix, because we will check on that. That's the evidence that we need as auditors, that you can show us your methodology of keeping up to date with all of the legal requirements and specific customer or contractual requirements. So that was it for me from the auditor perspective. I hope it was clear. It was a little bit fast, but make sure you have your implementation level into enough maturity. We don't expect everything to be perfect in the initial audit, but we do expect your maturity levels to grow over the certification cycles. That's it for my part. I propose to give the word back to Peter.
Slide, Stefan, you can show.
Okay. This is the PDCA. To start over again, as I said, this maturity model, we have an initial audit, 2 surveillance audits, and then we go in recertification. We look at everything again. So we have this nice cycle, and in each cycle, we expect your organization to be more mature, more secure, more precise in the implementation of the systems. Thank you.
Good. Arjen, you can take over.
Thank you, Peter and Stefan, for delivering this very practical webinar session. I would like to firstly apologize for the technical difficulties that you may have experienced during today's session. Now, because of the time limitation, we will jump right into the questions for today's session. The first question is related to the current circumstances that we are currently facing with the coronavirus outbreak. When performing an audit, how do you cope with the restrictions from the coronavirus pandemic? How do you manage remote auditing?
Stefan, do you take that one because you were
Yes.
doing it today?
Yes, I did it already in the meantime. So there are rules. There are specific rules on performing remote audits. The way it goes is that if we cannot go to the company, in this case through corona travel restrictions from the government, we will make a risk assessment. And depending on a number of elements, for example, is the company still active? Are all the people working from home? Can we access the systems? Do they have a platform like GoToMeeting or Teams from which we can perform the audit? Because this is something the customer needs to provide. It's not the certification body. And depending on these elements, there will be a decision made by a product manager if the audit can be performed remotely. 100%, maybe 50%. If it's 100%, okay, we can do it as planned. I did one 100% because I already knew the company. It can never be done in an initial audit. If it's an initial audit, it cannot be done remote. The stage 1, yes, but not the stage 2. If it's a surveillance audit, then it depends on the activity. If we can do 100% remote or 50 to 60% remote. That's case by case thing that has to be looked at with the certification body.
Thank you, Stefan. Now, the next question. Should we comply first with ISO 27001 before implementing ISO 27701?
Well, the annex is so the 701 is an annex on top of the 701. Do you need to start only with the 701? So the ISMS, no, you can implement them both, but the baseline is in the ISMS system. You will see that actually lots of the modules or the controls that are discussed in the PIMS system simply refer to the ISMS system. So in essence, if you take it very bare metal, you cannot implement the PIMS system without ISMS. Do you need to do it first? No, you can take care of that in your design, so you can both implement them both, but in most cases you will see that the ISMS system is the baseline, and then you add a flavor on top of it with the PIMS system.
Thank you. Now another question which might be related to the previous one. What is the difference between PIMS certification and GDPR facultative certification process? So if you can just go over it briefly.
Yeah, we discussed it actually in also one of the previous sessions, so you can revert back on that one. First of all, as we discussed, right now GDPR does not have official certification, not on European level. So the only way to prove that you're complying with GDPR is the PIMS system. So there is no baseline on GDPR level, on European level, what exactly you need to comply with. And the good news is, as discussed in previous sessions, which took actually the GDPR as a guideline, is that the GDPR requirements are fully covered in the ISO 27701, although not yet recognized by European Commission or European departments on that one. We were still waiting for official communications on that one. Still, as mentioned, maybe also on audit level, there is no official standard meaning how to audit it. So we stick to the ISO 27701 and the 701, so the ISMS system, to audit it, to prove compliance. As soon as the guidelines from European level will be published, they will plug in actually to that one and confirm how to get compliant. But using this system, as explained today, is the best way to actually to prove to anyone, your vendors, your ISO system, to prove you're compliant with GDPR.
Thank you, Peter. Now, to conclude the presentation, one last question. As a European enterprise, what do you recommend to go with? ISO 27001 plus ISO 27701 or ISO 27001 plus GDPR?
Well, actually, it's not really a choice. You can implement GDPR using the 701, and this is, for example, explicitly explained in the CDPO course. The practical guidance, which checkpoints you need to mark, are actually discussed in the PIMS system. It also depends on how your customers, your vendors, your subjects, so the people you work with, demand for certification. So if there is no demand for GDPR certification, you can simply stick to the ISMS. Only if there are very strong demands for proving compliance with GDPR, I would highly recommend using the PIMS system for that one, because that's one actually that provides a certifiable checklist in that sense. And keep in mind, as I mentioned also during the sessions, the demand for certification for proof will only grow. Again, I would strongly suggest you implement the PIMS system as of now, and it will make sure actually you will be able to use that one also to prove compliance. For example, if your data protection authority will visit you because of complaints or simply for an audit or for a check, and they will see actually how you implement it, and they will actually also confirm actually that using that system will comply to the GDPR.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you, Peter and Stefan, again for this remarkable session, and thank you everyone for attending today's session. We would like to apologize once again for the technical difficulties that you may have experienced during today's session, which occurred due to the large number of attendees requesting to join the live session. This session will be recorded and posted on our website, as well as on our YouTube channel, along with the slides of the presentation. For more information about our webinars or the PCB store, please visit our website, www.pcb.com. Thank you all, and stay safe.